Hello, everyone. How are you? I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Victoria. I'm an SEO consultant based in London. If you're wondering, is this how people from London speak now? Yes. I'm also, I'm originally from Argentina, and I'm also a comedian, not only just an SEO personality. And if you're wondering how good is my comedy career going, well, I host SEO webinars. uh, and probably this is the biggest gig that I will have this year in lockdown. Anyway, I'm very excited to be here today. We're going to be talking about now natural language processing, the irony of having me speaking about language, hosting. But I have a great panel, a very knowledgeable panel tonight, and I'm going to introduce them. And I also prepared icebreaker, a question to break the ice. The question is, what's your favorite word? So let's start with Daniel. Daniel is presenting today. Daniel Liddle is a senior SEO account manager at Croud. So how are you doing tonight, Daniel?
Good, Victoria. Thank you. I've been trying to think of what is my favorite word, and I think in context of NLP, which I'll go into a little bit later, it's signifier. I won't explain it yet.
Okay. This is not what you see on our sound check, Daniel.
Oh no, no, that was vagabond, and that was completely random.
Great. We also have tonight Kristine Schachinger.
I'm
pronouncing this well. I mean, no.
You actually pronounce it, as the Germans tell me, I pronounce my name wrong. So in American, it's Schachinger. But you were closer to the correct pronunciation if you're in Europe.
It gets to the Deutsche Schule, Córdoba, 3 Jahre. That's why I'm pronouncing your surname correctly. So Kristine is an SEO legend with 2 decades of experience. And today she will tell us what's her favorite word.
I don't know. See, I looked up my favorite word, and it's actually not a bad word unless you look in Urban Dictionary. And Duane told everybody I would tell everybody my favorite word. So should I tell them my favorite word, or should I pick another favorite word?
Please do. Please do, Kristine.
It actually just means bad person, and it's a twat waffle.
This is great. Twat waffle.
Yeah.
We also have Jeff Coyle tonight. He's the co-founder and chief strategy officer at MarketMuse. And I heard he changed his title to strategy because sometimes he looks at the wall and he pretends he's thinking. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yeah, that's about right. I think all around, that's what I'm looking for. And my favorite word is intent. And if you follow me on Twitter at Jeffrey_Coyle, you'll see a lot of intent.
That's great. And we have also Duane Forrester, VP of Industry Insight at Yext. How are you tonight, Duane?
I am incredible. Thank you.
Would you like to tell us what's your favorite word?
You know what? I would. In fact, originally when we prepared this, my intent had been intent, but Jeff beat me to that. So I had to change my intention. And I have come to the conclusion that my favorite word is conversion for obvious reasons. But I have a close second, and my close second is govens. So, folks can feel free to go look that up. I am a, how can I put this? I am a govern native, a digital govern. I am a little bit lost. So maybe I need some natural language processing to get me sorted out.
Like most people that work in SEO, Duane.
Yeah.
That's the common denominator of everyone working in this industry. So I will tell you my favorite word. My favorite word is oversharing. It's a word that only exists in English. In Spanish, we don't have a word for oversharing. Everything is sharing. And
because you can't overshare.
Exactly. For those people who are not in the UK, oversharing is everything that is when you talk about something that is not the weather. Yes, that's oversharing here. So we are now going to go to the presentation that Daniel has prepared. Then we have some discussions about this, and then I think we have some questions. So if you want to start, Daniel, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Let me know when you can see my screen. Cool. Can you see? Cool. So yeah, so this is about 5 ways to use NLP in SEO. And just want to caveat that I'm not a data scientist. The way I came across NLP was completely out of necessity in order to get the kind of actions that I wanted. So what is natural language processing? So essentially, it's a field of artificial intelligence that gives the machines the ability to read and understand derived meaning from human language. It's not just about looking at the text, it's about understanding what that is that it's saying, the concept, essentially. Now, 4 reasons why SEOs need to utilize NLP is, at the moment, there's like tons of resource online how to do this, especially from leading publications like Semrush. And kind of the main reasons why we need to use this is search is changing. Post-BERT, Google is tapping into more natural conversation searches that will become harder to quantify. I don't know if you've ever seen someone speak to an Alexa, but we still talk differently and type differently to search engines. So Google is trying to basically kind of stop that a little bit and make us talk a bit more conversational. And with that, there's lots of data. Now, with lots of data, it's great because we have access to so many insights and technology. Problem is, there's a lot of it, and it's very hard to quantify. And also because of this, search is getting really messy, especially with stuff like contextual search and intent. It's all becoming very, it's got a lot of context, caveats. So the 4th one is the critical insights we can get from that. You stop doing stuff manually, stop using our brain power on stuff that we could be using for other things. And so what NLP kind of does is it sorts the chaos out. The way that our language is constructed is what is called unstructured data to machines. It's basically hard for it to dissect into columns and rows in what's called a relational database. The reason it's hard is loads of aspects, but kind of like the ones that are kind of easy to understand is like spelling errors, spacing, symbols, colloquialisms, words that could be a noun or a verb, which is a really important one. And Google talks a lot about like their patterns and stuff. And you can see an example on the right, just how like that kind of stuff works. So some of the models, I won't go into too much detail about these, but gives you kind of like an indication of how it works. So one of them is called the BAO model, which is bag of words. So it counts the words in a corpus of text, which allows it to create a score of occurrence. And depending on what model you use, it can get rid of stop words like this, as, and words like that. TF-IDF, which is term frequency inverse document frequency vectorizer. Now, this is like a rather old school metric, and it's used by Google, but essentially what it's doing is it's counting the number of words in the text and then comparing that to like the whole kind of documents that are out there. So if you think about it in terms of Google, it's looking at a page and it's comparing it to the rest of the website, something that we wouldn't be able to do. But it's used a lot in kind of finance and social media scraping and all that type of stuff. Tokenization, so that's a process of dividing the quantity of text into smaller parts called tokens. So yeah, it just takes a word, gives it a number, and then it's easier for the computers to understand. And stemming, so that's getting rid of prefixes and suffixes, so stuff like co in coworker and meant in ship in internship. Now, I said earlier about signified and signify, and the reason I wanted to bring this up is about intent. So generally what Google's looking for is when we type in a keyword, what are we actually looking for? Now, going back to the 18th century linguist, Ferdinand de Saussure, he came up with this concept of the signifier and the signified. So the signifier is the object and the thing. So if you think about it, it's like a keyword, and the signified is the concept, and that's like the intent. And generally, you can break down any keyword into kind of 3 intents. So the first one's transactional, which is to purchase a product, service, or booking. Informational, so that would be looking for longer form content, usually top of the funnel, so probably not going the stuff that's going to convert directly, but probably gets a ton of search volume and just has tons of content on the page. And then navigational, so that's looking to find like a particular website, so you could consider that something like branded search. Now, why does Google want to know intent? Well, it wants you to be happy, and it's working. You can see this was a satisfaction report from last year or early this year, I can't remember, but it shows you like Google just kind of like outranks in terms of all the rest of the search engines in terms of matching and making people happy. They make people happy, people click on websites, you come back to Google, etc. And now BERT. Now, probably everyone's probably heard of BERT if you work in SEO, and it's not too hard to understand. Essentially, the way that models worked in the past is they kind of crawled stuff a bit linearly. What BERT does is it does it bi-directionally. So it doesn't just look at it in a linear fashion. It looks at the whole corpus of keywords and makes connections from that that you wouldn't usually be able to find reading a piece of text linearly, and takes in the context of just everything. And it's just like, it's kind of revolutionary. BERT's been around for a while. It was actually created by Google, and but yeah, ever since they've implemented it, it's really shook things up. Now, a note on Smith. So there was a lot of chatter earlier this year about Smith being better than BERT, and it came from a patent that Google released. And what it does is, if you think of BERT looks at things in the context of words, Smith looks at things in context of like blocks of text. So it could be like paragraphs, like if you've got like a blurb at the top of the page, it looks at it that way. But what does that mean? Smith's going to replace BERT? Probably not, because it's more like it's going to work in tandem. And what that means is Google's going to be able to provide more relevance and value for search queries. So in terms of actions that we would have to do, it would be a greater focus on not just looking at words, but the structure of the content that you put on the page. But now to get into the nitty-gritty of actually how to use it, because you might think at this point, oh, this is something that is too technical, but you can do this right now. So if you go to this webpage and you put in any block of text, I've used Jeff's bio for no reason. And you can kind of see like how kind of NLP kind of breaks down the text. And I'll go through what each part of those means. So the first one is entities. So Google actually has said they use entities in the past, and essentially what entities are they are a object. So they're a physical thing in the world. So if you think about it, it's like the signifier. And you can see like it from the example on the right, like how it's kind of breaking down that thing, and it's able to identify that James Joyce is a person. It's even able to identify that when we mention one, we don't mean the number one, we actually mean a person. So yeah, entities are really important because it's able to branch off context from that into other things. So for instance, you can see it's picked up James Joyce, so it'd be able to branch off from that, figure out that he's a writer, he's connected to Dublin, and all sorts of other branches to bring more context into what people are searching for. And then underneath each one, there's a scoring called salience, and that's basically indicates how much it thinks it's relevant to the document, and it's a score out of 1. And the next one is sentiment. So sentiment is basically it's assessing whether it's the way your content is formed. Is it being very positive? Is it being very negative or neutral? So if you think of something that could be very positive, it would be like a PR release. That'd be very positive because you'd be talking a very like a manner which you're just boosting up a product or something. Very negative could be something like a Daily Mail article or a gossip site that's like exposing some celebrity or something. And then neutral would probably be something like a business, a finance report or something very like numbers heavy. But yeah, it gives you a good indication of how it's thinking about that. Now syntax. Now syntax is, there's not really many actions you can get from this, but it's kind of cool to look at the connections it's making from each word. As you can see here, like it's making a contact between is and figure, and it's able to see that those two type of words are actually connected in the wider context. So yeah, it gives you a really good insight in how that works. And last but not least is categories. So Google has in their database 600 categories, which you can look at your leisure. And yeah, it basically assumes it's almost like topic modeling, and it's seeing what kind of area you fit into. Now, key takeaways in terms of how to use this. So the first thing I would look at is, what does the tool say is your most relevant entity? And if you say targeted a keyword or a topic, is that actually coming up when you put this in? You can just take like the initial sentence to see if that works. Is there a main entity in the text that isn't being picked up? So have you put, and what you can do if that isn't being picked up is try and rearrange the words so it's a bit more like out there that's the subject you're talking about. Study the structure of a competitor URLs and compare it in relation to your own copy. So see the structure of how they're making connections in the words they put in, particularly like stop words and stuff. And then look at the key attribute of language used. So is it passive? Is it assertive, positive, neutral, and negative? Now, when I say assertive as well, this is really important for knowledge graphs, because you'll notice that the knowledge graphs and any kind of search feature, like Google kind of likes that if you use words like is instead of are, because it shows a bit of confidence in your text, like something is this. You're not kind of being like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So you're giving like an indication that you know what you're talking about. And yeah, is it able to semantically relate the text back to a relevant category? If you're talking about, I don't know, lamps, because that's the first thing I'm staring at, does the NLP model say that it thinks you're talking about travel? So you might want to shift some text around with that. So this is an example of how I've used this in the past. So what I did was I analyzed knowledge graphs because I was looking at how they're structured to see if Google kind of prefers like the way like the words are constructed. And I came out with kind of this loose boilerplate of kind of how it likes to look at stuff. So first is the focus keyword for the copy. This is not gospel either. This was kind of just very loose. The literal explainer, so articulate in text form a vivid description of the keyword, the origins and context, and the practicality, its use, its looks, longevity or benefit, and the resolve the interest. And I've given an example text, which is what I wrote, but it might not be that accurate. But that's kind of like how it looks like if you were to build that out. And here's an example of that. Like you can see here, it's a keyword, it's the literal explainer, and it's the relevancy. I know like we're not going to beat Wikipedia, but there's other examples where you can see like how the sentences are constructed where it works in this way. And it worked. So for context, I was working for a large beauty publication last year. The issue they had was they were ranking for loads. They were doing really well in terms of rankings. They had 60K plus keywords on page 1 in the US. But the problem was Google was kind of gobbling up a lot of retail space in terms of people also ask, knowledge graphs, featured snippets. So we're kind of tasked with like, how do we kind of tackle that? And the first thing we found was like, yeah, Google kind of is scraping this from the first text. And this beauty publication, the content was really good, but because these were experts writing it, in terms of the intent, most of the keywords were from someone from an entry-level point. They weren't an expert. So what we did was we got them to kind of go back, rewrite in the first paragraph following this boilerplate template, and it worked. So we ended up increased the featured snippets by 153%. And we also increased URLs in position 1-3 by 146%. So yeah, working in this way works. It doesn't, that template doesn't work for everything. Just in particular, the knowledge graphs and the featured snippets that were being picked up for these set of keywords, it worked for that. Now, going beyond the demo, because obviously if you were to do this at scale, that would take you ages. There's a really good article by J.R. Oakes about how to do this using Python. And yeah, I'd really recommend it because you can run Search Console in tandem to extract copy and match that with the natural language API. So yeah, really good. And I'd highly recommend reading that. So in terms of using NLP to actually generate text and not analyze. So in summarizing text. So you can create text using machine learning and NLP. It's called NLG, natural language generation. And you can do it at scale. You don't have to do it like one by one. And you can use that for like category page titles, ad copy, FAQs, and meta description. And it also is very good for understanding a consensus around a question-based query. particularly important when it comes to health or financial keywords, because say you want to say a certain thing, is the consensus against you on that, because on the first page of Google, because it might indicate that it might be actually hard to rank in terms of what you're trying to say. Now, you can grab content from Google by either going to Semrush and using their dashboard function, or using the API. API is really good. I'd recommend getting your head around that if you can, because it can be extremely powerful. Alternatively, a guy called Mario Villas, he's created a useful tool for scraping URLs from Google. And if you know your way around Python, it's really cool. And you can do it for multiple query cases and not just one. And then you can extract content with something that I struggle to pronounce. I'm going to go with Traffilatora. And with that, you can scrape actual content from the site, not just the URLs. So if you give it a CSV with a list of URLs you want to extract content from, it's really good at kind of getting rid of all the noise in the text and just going for like the body copy, which can be hard if you're scraping multiple websites, because people put their copy in all sorts of places. And yeah, you don't need that much Python knowledge to use that. And it's just as simple as uploading a CSV. Now, summarizing the text with TensorFlow. So TensorFlow is an open source platform for machine learning, which was created by Google. It's really powerful. I haven't even got my head around all of it. But the key thing you want to look at with this is something called the summarization pipeline, where it uses a text-to-text transfer transformer, which is basically how we summarize things. But it doesn't really work with transaction keywords, because essentially you need to feed it lots of content. And if you think about like what's going to come up for broad transaction keywords, it's going to be category pages or probably product pages with not a lot of content. So you can kind of see like the mixed bag of stuff we've got here. And my favorite one is get ready to air out your hip bones, which is poetic. But yeah, doesn't really make sense. It does in a weird way, but yeah, we wouldn't want to use that for like meta descriptions or anything. But in terms of like, if you were to use it to edit your own site, so this is what I did on the beauty publication I worked on last year. We just scraped the text from the URL. This is kind of what it came up with. And as you can see, it's pretty good. It still needs editing. You can kind of see like there's some symbols in there. I don't know where it's got those from. But generally, like, it's not bad. And in terms of using that for like meta descriptions and stuff, it wouldn't take too long to edit. And if you think about like how long it would take to rewrite like 400 meta descriptions that you were missing, you could run this instead and just basically go through and just edit them and upload. So yeah, a lot less time doing something that you could better off doing something else. And again, a really good resource is Andrea Volpini. If you don't follow him, I'd highly recommend, because he's doing some crazy stuff in terms of NLP and machine learning. And if you go to his article, he shows you how to use that with BERT as well. So the next one is back to the analysis side of things. So topic modeling, categorization, and clustering. So QueryCat. So QueryCat is a demo repository created by J.R. Oakes, and I'll be mentioning him quite a lot because, again, really good resource to follow, so I'd highly recommend. And it's the simplest tool to use. In the GitHub page, it actually has a Google Colab notebook, so all you need to do is just run the scripts on it and edit to put in your data. So yeah, highly recommend that. And it uses something called the a priori algorithm. And a priori in Latin means from the former, and it generally meaning self-evident from a statement, not based on experience. And essentially what it does is it looks at patterns, and it uses that with something called association rule mining, ARM. And ARM is used on everything for like content recommendations, purchase recommendations, and content on sites. But yeah, you can use that for keywords as well, and it's really good at finding patterns. Now, also, if you wanted to gather your data set, you can get that from Keyword Planner, Search Console, Semrush. A really good quick tip about Search Console as well is if you're unfamiliar about using the Search Console API, if you go into Data Studio and extract it from there using their connector, you can actually get more queries through that because there's like 1,000 limit in GSC dashboard. So yeah, and it would take you like under 5 minutes to do. And here's an example. So I used hats, I don't know why, and I extracted all the keywords associated with hats in Semrush, so around 50,000, and ran the CSV in a priori. And yeah, this is kind of how it modeled it. So it went from 50,000 keywords and then converted that into about 5,000 categories. And you can basically like go through, QA it, go look at the stuff that it hasn't got right or edit it and then run it again and then see what it gives you if you wanted to get those categories really down. Now, using the data, so you can quantify your footprint. So if you was using something like Search Console, you could look at your queries and see what areas you're doing well in. And especially if you've just come out of an algorithm update, you can see, you know, what key areas, what queries are you doing well in, what have you lost in impressions, what have you gained. If you're building a site up in terms of the categories, you can use that for its information architecture. And if you're doing just prospective keyword research, you can find, you're able to quantify key areas to tackle instead of having like a 50,000 road spreadsheet. Now, quickly on visualizing reporting, which I won't go into too much, but you know, obviously you can use Sheets or Data Studio. Data Studio is really cool if you've got some really funky APIs connected in as well. And you can just have a live dashboard going, which you can share with everyone. And as you can see how this looks, like I used the hat categories I picked. Apparently bucket hats is winning this year. And using Python. So it's not that complicated to use the visualizations in Python. I've kind of picked out my favorite ones. Matplotlib, which is just the standard graphical output within Python. That just gives you like your generic like scatter charts, line graphs, etc. Gleam is a really good one. So Gleam, you're able to have an interactive chart. So if you wanted to filter like to country or to certain blocks of your site, it's really easy to use. And my all-time favorite one is Geoplotlib. So what you can do with that is create heat maps, and really cool if you're doing like international SEO. Advanced techniques. So this, where you go with NLP, like there's millions and millions of things you can do with it. And in relation to SEO, some of the things that we've built and some of the things that we're testing, because it's mainly the stuff that is taking a lot of legwork. So the first thing is an ideation tool. So this is just not just scraping from search results, but combining that with video, social media, Reddit, etc., to find like key topics and what they're talking about in them, and then combining that with Google Trends to create like a really cool content calendar. Automated content briefs for writers. So it gives them key insights into like what's the tone of voice, what the content covers. A hreflang tool that helps you basically find content on your site that's similar to something else in a different language. Because I don't know about anyone else, but hreflang is the bane of my life, especially if you're working on a site that doesn't have consistent trends creation, or, you know, someone's publishing stuff at a different rate in another country compared to someone else, and not just multiple languages, but same language as well. And schema opportunity spotting. So beyond FAQ, which is kind of easy to spot, looking for other opportunities to use structured data. So who to follow in terms of, you know, getting that key insight into how Python, NLP, and SEO works? Obviously, everyone on this panel. Andrei Volpini, who I mentioned before, J.R. Oakes, Tiago Conclaves at Valtech, he's really good too, and Ruth Burr-Reedy at Upbuild. And yeah, I absolutely, if you're not following Upbuild's blogs, they're really cool. And I've followed them for years, and yeah, they're really cool. And yeah, a big shout out to Hamlet Batista, because I don't think I especially wouldn't have even known about like Python and SEO if he didn't say anything. So yeah, he'll be sorely missed, not just for his insights, but yeah, his personality as well. And then at the end of the slide, which I think we're putting online afterwards anyway, there's a few cool resources that you can use if you wanted to get into it. Python for beginners is not essential because some of the elements in it you won't use. I'd recommend like looking at the SEO specific ones first. And then if you want to build out kind of like what you're doing, you can get a bit more into Python. And that's it.
Well, amazing. I didn't know most of it, so thank you for this this 20-minute summary. There is a lot to take in. I realized because I keep a document of a New Year resolution. So Learn Python has been my New Year resolution since 2017.
I mean,
so I took it out of the
time.
list. I took it out of the list because I lied to myself, basically. But it's great. It was your New Year resolution and you stick to it. Congratulations, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So we have some questions from the audience. I'm trying to... You see that I almost lost connection, and this time it wasn't because I turned off the... I unplugged my modem. No, this time was Virgin Media just doing its thing. So we have some questions. For example, how does schema fit into natural language? Let's pick someone. Who would like to answer this? Kristine, would you like to answer?
So a lot of what Daniel talked about is in the as Google moves into NLP, but originally Google used something and still uses something called NLU, which is natural language understanding. True NLP would be Google being able to understand as we talk and you hear me, you could just translate that in your brain quickly. Google's working towards that, but they're not to true NLP yet. So NLU requires an interpreter. And the interpreter is schema. So schema is not a ranking factor, but what schema does is it tells Google, let's say you have a recipe site, that your recipe has cooking time here, and it has the instructions here, and the ingredients here, and the temperature here, so that Google knows that this data is this type of data, so that when it interprets it, it already has a starting point. It's not trying to just interpret it out of all the text on the page. So schema helps Google better understand your page. So when you add schema to your page, you're telling Google what certain types of information are. And the reason Google doesn't support all schema, but only certain types of schema, is because it's limited in what it will look at as far as schema to understand the page. So it's really good at helping Google find meaning in your content, because it gives it a categorization for that content to fall under. So if I say like mud pies and it's a recipe, then that's different than like, my kids outside making mud pies in the rain and the dirt, right? So by saying it's a recipe and here's the ingredients, Google knows that's a recipe for mud pies, which is a southern dessert here in the States, which is very good.
One thing Daniel mentioned that about the categorization, it fits well with what Kristine stated, is that there's a number of taxonomies that content and entities can be classified in, and that you can actually view. So if you look at Wikidata, that's WordNet to Freebase to Wikidata. There's been a migration to that. You can look at that background, and if you see search result features on that search result that are entities, as Daniel mentioned, you can actually decode those links from the search result page and learn what part of the taxonomy they're in. And while Daniel said there was 600 of those, there's actually thousands of them that have been manually added to that original taxonomy. So I challenge everyone to go look at, as Daniel specifically showed, how that Google API works and classifies, but also go to look at Wikidata. And if you see different SERP features on that search result that they look like other topics or related entities, you can dig in and learn where they fit into the taxonomy. I think that's very relevant to schema. It's also about, Google just trying to figure out where things sit in the classifier,
And just to add, by the way, real quickly, for anybody who is new to this and all these big words and new words are like confusing, entity just means noun. So Google's looking at person, place, thing, or pronoun. So when you talk about entities and entity search, that's when Google started associating meaning to words. It moved from the bag of words approach that Daniel mentioned to where it understood definitions of like tea and ice and glass and cup and presidents and things like that. So it's just a noun, and Google understands the definition of the noun. And that's kind of where they started when they moved from strings to things and into this journey onto NLP.
So can I just want to add something to this, Victoria. It's I think a logical extension of the question. I was actually on the team that launched schema.org when I was at Bing. So I have a slightly different view of all of this. First off, my view includes absolutely everything that you've heard on this webinar so far today is true, and you need to focus on it. There's that. The logical extension of all of this, right? So, Kristine basically said, here's our foundation, our framework. Jeff gave a great example here of like, okay, here's how you would actually think about this in terms of the totality of it. Something that Jeff brought up that's really important is this extension of schema attributes. Like, feel free to pile in there, guys. The whole program was built for people to give suggestions. But understand this. If your suggestion is self-serving, it will never move forward. If it is in service of the greater, as Kristine puts it, noun, pronoun, or verb, then it will move forward. Now, the likelihood of you having discovered a noun that the engineers who run Schema between Google and Microsoft, that they haven't figured it out yet, and that's valuable to humans on Earth, I'm going to say that's low at this point. But feel free to go prove us wrong. Now, here's the really important part about this, right? We talked slightly about entities. Kristine defined that for us. What's really critical here is also understanding the level at which Google, Bing, and all of the large companies operate today with their knowledge graphs, and how the journey from something being marked up with schema gets into becoming the entity, becoming relationship attachment to other areas, and building out the knowledge graph. This is the next critical thing. And I know one of our people, Rajiv, asked a question, said, look, this is new. How do I learn about NLP and SEO and machine learning? And I can tell you that bucket is massively deep. It's massively deep. It's massively wide. It's like diving into the Pacific Ocean and saying, I think I can swim all this. Technically, I'm sure, like, you can swim, but like it's big. And so it's, follow these things. I love Daniel's list of great resources that are in there. If you guys look on Audible, I'm listening to a book right now from Kenyon College called The Science of Information from Language to Black Holes. This is all about the growth of machine learning and natural language processing, how the hardware, how the software, the need for it, all of these things are being developed. Find resources like these, and that's the beginning of your journey, because this is a really deep, deep ocean.
Yes. And if I'd like to just add something about behind a little bit of the background in knowledge graphs. First of all, knowledge graphs have been around since the 60s or 70s. Mm-hmm. So they're not new. Google just co-opted the name knowledge graph, which really made made the academics really mad, because they're like, wait, we use knowledge graphs. But knowledge graph is simply where Google takes a mathematical number, and let's just say apple and juice are assigned numbers. They're put into a vector relationship graph, and then there's a node between them that shows the strength of the relationship. Mm-hmm. So if apple and juice are a pretty strong relationship, because apple juice, right? So it can combine those. If I said peanut butter juice, they would have no relationship or a very weak relationship, because who's ever heard of peanut butter juice? So it's how Google defines the relationship between known entities, known nouns. So it knows the definition of apple, it knows the definition of juice, and it knows that these are strongly related. So if you have a document that has apple juice in it, it knows that these things are commonly found together. So that's a basic of the mathematical relationships in a knowledge graph. As opposed to how they used to do it, which just is the bag of words approach, which is just and all these other things indicate to us what this might be, but we don't really know what it means.
I think that one point on that, Kristine, I think it's a brilliant way to describe like something that does go together and something that doesn't. And in Daniel's presentation, he covers categorization and clustering, different techniques. There are piles of ways that you can cluster. There's piles of ways that you can categorize. One of them is, through just classifying into a taxonomy. The other is trying to automate with machine learning. What you kind of touched on early in the presentation was topic modeling. Topic modeling is truly trying to associate, and I think for SEOs or for content strategists, it's about, if I were truly an expert on this topic and I wrote a great piece of content on it, what are the things that I would naturally have covered well? That's the easiest, real life application of topic modeling for you. So it says, if I'm speaking about apples and all of their applications and all the intents that people could possibly be looking for, does it make a good juice or not? It's probably something you'd cover. And that relationship connects to a high likelihood that that person is truly the most comprehensive expert on that topic. And now if I take all of those concepts, then I can start categorizing them by intent. Then I can start categorizing them and clustering them by intent, which Daniel showed really well. So where do you get that whole pool of words that you classified? That's where the real energy goes. And that's where something like a Semrush comes into really handy, that's where you found your big pool. Now you got to get those pools into your target, the thing that associates that's with your business. So I think it's a great way to describe that, Kristine.
Oh, thank you. And just to add on to that, not to monopolize any time, everyone feel free to interrupt me, but just because I don't know if it's just myth or legend or if it was real, but I was told that the way that Sergey decided to create Google was they went to the library and they went to find books on how to organize information. And they realized that the library is how you organize information at the time. So the card catalog is if anyone remembers, I was with cards, had titles and descriptions, and the Dewey Decimal Number, that's your search result. Dewey Decimal Number is your URL. URL goes to your book. Your book is your website. If you know nothing about NLP, if you understand nothing that we're talking about today, if you do a website like a really good book, with a really good table of contents being your navigation and your chapters being specific, general to specific, like I might write about coffee and have subchapters on types of coffees around the world. You're hitting exactly what Jeff talked about, which is topic modeling, without even knowing that you're doing it. So whenever you're doing your website, if you're not really sure how to apply all this, just remember you're doing a really good book with really defined chapters and a really good table of contents, which is your navigation, your site architecture. So hopefully that helps people that are not quite following all the NLP words.
We had some question about that, right? How is this search level IA related to rank brain and neural matching?
Neural matching is what Jeff is a layer of what Jeff was talking about. So there's only two. I think there's only two right now. If I'm wrong, someone please tell me. They've added one. I had COVID for most of the year, so I could have missed something. But they're the two live artificial intelligence layers on Google Live search results. They're added post-retrieval, so they don't affect rankings per se. They don't affect the evaluation, but they affect how Google retrieves the information. So Rank Brain, remember we were talking about the knowledge graph and the relationships between two items in the knowledge graph. Rank Brain originally just kicked in when Google didn't understand the relationships, and it would give you a kitchen sink result, and over time you would click on that, and Google would decide what that result most meant to the searcher. And so if I had peanut butter juice and that wasn't a thing, but suddenly over time it became a thing, Rank Brain would understand that because they take the data from the clicks and the queries and they move it back into the model. Also, it's location dependent. So my favorite example is sweets. So I did a talk on NLP in the US and in London. And sweets in London means candy. Sweets in the United States means many things. So when I did a search result for sweets, I got all different things, including something called sweet sweat for the gym. I have no idea yet to this day what that means, but it's definitely not candy. And in London, when I did sweets, I got a nutrition panel for candy. I got all types of candies because it understood what it meant. Rank Brain already understood that there was a strong relationship in the UK for the word sweets to candy. In the United States, there wasn't a strong relationship. So I got a bunch of different things until over time, if you look 2 years later, it has started to really understand that sweets can mean candy or desserts, kind of one or the other. So that's Rank Brain. And then neural matching is just super synonyms. So it means that if I say I need to change the cat litter, I need to change my, I'm trying to think of change, good words for change. And it knows the synonym to it. So I can use change in all sorts of different contexts. I'm going to change my hair. I'm going to change my cat litter. I'm going to change my refrigerator. But Google now knows the super synonym. This is a super, I can never say that word, synonym for that. So it knows the definition of change is different depending on the contextualization of the sentence. So that gives us broad topical modeling. And I'll be quiet now because I've talked way too much.
Also, if you were near a local business that is called Sweets, probably that would have come up too.
Mm-hmm. This is a really good context as well in terms of if you think about, like, this is probably beyond SEO, but in terms of the environment we live in now, biases in data is something that like everyone's trying to like get their heads around about what that does. There's loads of instances of this going wrong, especially with AI. And if you think about like Facebook and like all them trying to find like almost like what people have been doing for centuries, the absolute truth. So there's like another layer which adds a complication into figuring out like what's the consensus, and also is that consensus right? And it can only do that based on the pre-trained data set. So then how does it figure out from that like what's good and what's bad, essentially? And that type of stuff is going to develop exponentially over the next few years.
Are you saying that not all voice assistants should be women? They shouldn't be called Alexa, Siri. They shouldn't be serving. The person that serves you shouldn't be a woman.
I'm just going to mute myself and sit back right now. It's all yours, kid.
Well, to change the subject explicitly, I think a good way to reference it is actually looking at the use cases, that Google's use cases. So if they're inside their walls and they're trying to figure out, and when you ask the question of rank brain versus neural matching versus topic modeling versus automatic classification, all these different use cases, what are they actually trying to do? And if they're trying, and I love the beginning, you were talking about Smith, Daniel, and how that's trying to predict in context and with large pools of like entire documents and document sets. But when Google's trying to associate a page to a concept, that's their internal use case. How they do it is what we're trying to figure out, right? And when they're trying to associate words with search queries, that's another use case for them. Right, so that's more the neural matching. Rank brain's more the page versus concept. So I always like to sit back and try to figure out their internal use cases. And that's when you start to think about things like intent. So in the example that was given, the entire world of everything related to why people would want to research peanut butter is dramatic. There's a lot of different reasons why somebody would. That's the pool of all the true intent. What Google chooses to show on the search result is their favored intent for you and your browser situation. That's very different. So you cannot only research the search result and what you see to really learn about a concept. And that is a really strong takeaway for an SEO. It's to say, just because you see it in your search result right now, don't just look at those top 3 pages and try to emulate them to do all of your work. All right? Anyone who says you should do that and sells their course for $3,000, it's a laugh, because that's not the true intent. You're not going to be allowed to rank for the what is peanut butter definition just because you wrote a great definition. You need a huge corpus of content that tells the story that you're the expert on peanut butter. You better have that entire inventory. Mm-hmm. And that's really coming back to Daniel's full story, is to say, you've got to be the thing that connects the dots to everything with your content, and that's really a great use case for NLP.
So I'm gonna jump on the top of what Jeff is saying here. There's no shortcuts, none. The days of shortcuts are years behind us. So if you haven't read that memo yet, please officially accept this copy. There are no shortcuts now. So in order for you to be the peanut butter juice expert, you have to have your 10,000 hours of peanut butter juicing. Because otherwise, you're clearly not an expert. You're not the authority. And even then, you could be an expert in absentia. You could be an expert in your category, but no one knows about you because you don't participate. You don't share. You don't move the corpus of knowledge forward on the topic. Therefore, no one recognizes you for your expertise. Like it's a multi-step process today. And so don't be thinking, we talk about this, and there's a whole webinar on it, and Daniel does a great presentation on NLP, and Kristine helps you understand it with simple terms, and Jeff has got great use cases. Like, do not for an instant think that you are going to grab a tool. It is going to, quote, do NLP for you, for your SEO, and you will move something forward. That is not even remotely where we're at today. Although, having said that, there are systems out there that you can have write entire articles for you, and they sound completely lucid and expert level. Just let's be clear about this. Yeah. So to Kristine's point, costs money. To Jeff's point, he's pointing at his knee. He has a problem with his knee. But the reality here is there's an old cartoon from Mad Magazine called Spy versus Spy. And every time the white spy had the edge, the black spy somehow got by him. And then every time the black spy took a lead, the white spy came back and managed to trump him again. That's the world we're entering right now. So if you think that your rental machine learning system is going to produce content that is going to somehow trick Google's machine learning system into believing that it was a human that constructed this and is therefore the expert, you're really, really missing the point, because that is not going to happen right now. So like, you can't take the shortcuts. You have to double down and do the work. You have to ask yourself, like, going back to Kristine's example of a book. Okay. I've written 2 books now. And you know what? You write what you know. Don't go out and try to write a topic you don't know, because it will be patently obvious that you don't know pieces of that are core. And that's the world we all live in now with our websites and consumer expectations. In fact, this pandemic has brought forward, I would say, 5 to 10 years faster consumer expectations around getting direct answers, the authenticity of information, the accuracy of information. And we haven't even reached that level yet. Like, what we're talking about is still layers above all of this. And yet you need this to underpin your systems moving forward. I firmly believe every website should have its own knowledge graph. It can start as simply as putting stuff in a spreadsheet. But you've got to start cataloging it. You've got to start identifying it. You've got to start marking it up. Because without all of these things done, there is a line in the sand. You will get left behind. Personally, I think that line in the sand is May. Core Web Vitals is going to roll out in a meaningful way, and it is not going to take any prisoners. Big brand, small brand, medium, it's not going to matter. The math will sort out the results in an essential manner with it. There will be allowances, obviously, but we're starting to reach that point of the internet where there's a split happening. All of the answers I need versus all of the possible answers that exist. And all of the possible answers that exist are not needed. That's the perspective that a search engine has, because 10,000 answers is as good as 10 million answers. They'll never get through the first 5 answers anyhow. So
just to layer on top of that real quick, and not to get any deep into core updates, but you just played into a theory I've had on recovering sites from core updates. Mm-hmm. And that is that Google is trying to reduce the amount of resources that it uses in indexing and pulling back documents from the web, because almost everything I've done in core updates recovery has been technical, and sites that had technical issues for years. Mm-hmm. And on your money or your life queries, because Google doesn't know sites for your money or life, but your money or life queries. And so I think it's trying to cut down the number of sites that it'll bring back.
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't want to deal with technical issues anymore because of the cost associated.
It doesn't need.
Yeah, exactly. And for those that don't know, Google had to build like an entire dam to cool off one of its server facilities. So that definitely plays into exactly what I was thinking, and I hadn't really expressed it much because I didn't have anything to back it up, but that makes complete sense as part of that.
I love that, Kristine. I just want to add one piece of color to Kristine's point about the scale at which all of this is operating, right? If you guys haven't seen or heard about this, I think about 3 years ago, Microsoft sank a data center off of Ireland in the ocean to use the ocean to cool the data center. Okay, like I'm not making this up. And last year, they pulled the data center back up out of the ocean to take a look at it physically, see what kind of condition it was in. Obviously covered in barnacles, obviously covered in old Guinness beer cans, but it was all good. Okay, I have a comedy career similar to Victoria's, it appears. I should just stick to SEO. Got it.
Me too, but I'm a dreamer.
But my point here is, like, these companies are all in on this. So I did a look. There's a Wikipedia page that you can look up that tracks all of the mergers and acquisitions that Google does. There's one from Microsoft, Facebook, and so on. The one on Google, in the last 2 years, they've done 17 publicly acknowledged mergers and acquisitions. The dollars attributed to those, they only talk about 6 of them, and it's $5 billion over 2 years. The other 11, they don't talk about the money, but everything lines up. Computer storage, machine learning, visual search, and voice and auditory. All of those purchases line up with that flow. So I think we can see very clearly where we go in the future with this. And this technology is being employed now to try to sift through all the data because nobody needs or wants 10 million answers to something. We only need the one answer. But Google needs to make sure it's the right answer, and it will change over time for a variety of these reasons. So hyper important to understand.
I'm sorry, not to. I'm getting echo all of a sudden. Just real quick, Jeff, before it goes on Duane's topic here. Is everyone getting an echo? I'm getting an echo.
Yes. No.
Yeah. So when you were talking about looking for factual information, I just wanted to dispel a myth in the industry real quick and then add on to that. Google doesn't look at facts on the document corpus, the regular websites, but it does look at them and uses BERT for featured snippets, for consensus of information. So BERT is able to put in a document and look at, is this similar to the other documents, what they say? And we're going to omit, or we're going to add this to that corpus, and then we pull featured snippets from that. So BERT right now is a pre-training model, but they're using it to identify consensus of information for the featured snippets so they can get those to be more accurate. They do not, and they specifically say this in their documents, they do not use this in the regular search results, but they do use it in featured snippets, and that is part of the BERT. So if you're writing something and you want to be in a featured snippet, if you're trying to write something brand new, no one's ever heard of, not likely going to get in the featured snippet. It's going to need to be something that's among consensus of a lot of documents. So just want to add that point.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to layer on to what Duane said is that, that's another Google use case. You make your system so powerful and huge so that they can, catalog the world. But then you realize that there's a lot of stuff in the world you don't want, right? And you have to do that in an unbiased way if you're Google. So where over time that has changed. And so I built a focused crawler-based search engine platform around 2006 to 08. And we were always trying to think of how do we prune as quickly as possible, right? And they're now in a situation to where they have to take concepts, like Duane said, like bounce rates and like core web vitals and all these other data points into account. Well, another one is, does your content carry an appropriate, relevant narrative? Does it tell the story that you're an expert, right? So you look at something like Smith that can look at a larger pool of words and try to predict what that next paragraph should be, right? Or other things like that. Looking for signals so that they can get away with prioritizing their resources. And that's what I think Duane was saying, is they want to figure out how to best prioritize their resources and do it in a way that's okay for everybody. The world's not going to kill them if they prioritize properly and can justify that prioritization. Whereas it was a black box 15, 16 years ago when they were doing pruning experiments. And this is a way different because there's a lot more visibility on every step they take.
That's great. It has certainly been very eye-opening. I think that I will incorporate Python to my 2021 list of, how do we say this? You do the New Year resolution, yes. So it wasn't in the list. Now it might be on the list. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I will certainly rewatch these slides and try to get on top of this. Thank you, Daniel, Jeff, Kristine, and Duane. Generally, Anton gets annoyed when we finish 1 minute before, so I don't know if to wait 30 seconds. Like you, so I will fill in the void.
I will say this, Victoria, if I can, I'll just encourage everyone. If you have questions and they haven't been answered, reach out to everybody. Track down Victoria, track down Semrush. They can loop us all together. We can get answers to your questions. There's no reason for this. Yeah, Kristine's got it right on the screen. Like, hit our Twitter handles. Like, we're happy to engage with folks and help you out, right? It doesn't just end because Anton has now said, okay, we're all free to go.
We love Anton. We love Anton. For those who don't know, Anton is SEMrush head of influencers, and he is the one that puts us here together with the wonderful Kate, who is always doing the tech for us and keeping us in line. So I think we have reached to our time limit now. We
I
can
would
all
just say
go.
very quickly that, like Duane says, everyone get into Python because we need more open source libraries. We need people to come up with like really cool ideas, not so we can steal them, but so we can all build them together and make our lives much easier.
And I just wanted to say thank you, everybody. I learned something from everybody today, so I appreciate it. And it was a great presentation, Daniel.
Truly an awesome panel. And Daniel, awesome presentation. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you soon.